And we're live. All right. Which rookie's value changed the most during the draft? That and more this week on the couch. We're back on the couch. It's Wednesday. Things are settling. Initial impressions. Pete Davidson, Rotobahn. Which rookie's value changed the most based on what happened in draft weekend?
I mean, on my board, it's Mecole Hardman by quite a bit.
Sure.
I don't know about everybody else's, but on my board, he definitely jumped up quite a bit. And I have to be honest. I mean, I went back in and did more film on him, and it's sort of interesting because I work with a partner. I work with a guy who used to coach college football, and Hardman was a guy that we sort of split on. And it's funny. Normally, when we split on guys, we go back together. We do another film dive, and we come to a consensus. And we never really got back to Hardman. And like the last thing he said, he's like, "I don't know, man. I like Hardman." And sure enough, he was right. So the good thing is that when he jumped up a ton over my rankings, that my better judgment half was already pushing me in that direction. So it was easy to go back, do some film, and find the things that I definitely missed. And I'll tell you, one of the things I missed on Hardman, and this goes to this class where I actually had to look at 100 receivers this year, right? Like I actually spent time looking at like 100 different receivers, and it's just crazy. And the thing I missed on him is that he just learned how to play.
Right.
You know? I didn't pick that up. And to me, I'm like, wow, this guy looks raw. He looks like a body catcher. He looks like he's afraid of his hands. And I don't know if all of those things were wrong. Maybe some of them were. But the thing I didn't account for was that, this guy's learning how to be a receiver. And now, obviously, we project that amazing athlete and those quicks and all the things he can do into a particular scheme. And we have a very exciting player on our hands.
Right. And the story you weave there is important to establish how context can change what you see. It's not just the eye in the sky don't lie, because you're right. And I think Matt Waldman and I talked about Hardman. He's been playing wide receiver for 2 years, basically. I think.
Yes, that's right.
And if you watch him as someone in his second year and able to hang in the SEC and so on, and then you also, it's interesting because I think I was more heavy-handed about this, Pete, earlier in my career of doing this, where I wouldn't trust any organization over my evaluation. And now you try to be more granular about it. And there are certain organizations at particular positions, or even if we were to talk about someone like Deontay Johnson, certain organizations at certain positions with certain types of players that you defer to. And also,
you're right.
And also,
Pittsburgh's a great example.
and also with Hardman, you're really deferring to the organization's offense, not just in their ability to identify talent that fits in their offense, but just you're deferring to Patrick Mahomes. Give me a guy that has a chance to be one of Patrick Mahomes' main receivers. And even if I have my reservations, that payoff, that reward in the risk-reward equation, it greatly spikes and increases. What about somebody whose value went down? What about somebody who, when you looked at them after the draft, it just didn't look as appealing?
Good question. I'm just sort of going down my board here. Well, I mean, Bryce Love would be a good example, just because I was hoping he'd go to a place that wasn't just stocked full of running backs, including Chris Thompson, who, could shut down the long, the long window for him if he's around for a couple of years. So Bryce is a guy, despite the recent, has a stiff knee, this, that, and the other, I was still pretty excited about him. So, that I didn't like seeing him go there. Jalen Hurd was a guy I was really excited about. Now he's at a place with like a lot of receivers, a lot of running backs, and a stud tight end. So no matter how we want to maybe flex Jalen Hurd, he's in a pretty packed depth chart. Who's another one? Hakeem Butler, obviously, with draft position and also location. Location in some ways good, but also it's a very crowded receiver depth chart. So he's another one. Marquise Brown is an interesting one. I mean, I think he takes a little hit, but by the same token, I think people aren't really accounting for the possibility that Jackson could grow as a quarterback, that they're going to allow him to throw more. I'm not sure if people are necessarily looking at the potential for him to be a bit of a target magnet on that team. So I downgraded him a little bit, but not too much, whereas it seems like everybody's downgraded him a ton.
Yeah, these are some good names and good things to bring up. On Love, really quickly, I liked him a lot based on his 2017 tape
Yeah,
pre-draft. And you're right. Although, hey, look, Chris Thompson, I think, is breaking down. How
sure.
did he even last half the season last year? And in some ways, it's comforting.
And you know what? The interesting
Good.
thing on him
Yeah,
is, now if they have the two healthy big backs, maybe that allows Thompson to, they kept giving him too much and he would break
sure.
down, too much and he would break down. Maybe if they can get him to that 5, 6, 7 touches a week, he can be, dynamic, explosive, and available.
Right, and not wear down. But
Sorry about that.
you're fine. And I think you're right. That maybe for this year, but for the long
Yeah,
term, it's actually in some ways positive that he landed in an offense that gave that sort of designated explosive touch runner receiver where you're letting him run out of the shotgun against spread out defenses, or you're giving him these screens that aren't your traditional running back screen, but more like a wide receiver screen where you're getting it in stride and outside the numbers. So they've made Chris Thompson valuable for fantasy football in Washington.
right.
And Love is similar. And a fourth round pick to me, Pete, is somewhat expressing confidence when you're talking about a player who you might not even be able to have on the field this year
Yeah,
at
I
a
think
D
you're
value
right.
position. So
And a team using a fourth, and they already have running backs.
right. So it kind of cuts both ways. And look, that's the nature of this. No matter what, we can look at it and cuts both ways. We look at you mentioned Brown, and I have Brown 6 overall among my rookies for dynasty purposes because you're right. It's how much do you buy into Lamar Jackson's growth as a passer versus how much you just take the heavy reality of how there was truly zero fantasy value for wide receivers in Baltimore last year. So it's a glass half full, glass half empty. And it's funny because I did my first pass at running back rankings, Pete, and I find myself organizing
You talking
my
rookie or overall?
redraft, just like overall redraft running back
Gotcha.
PPR, and I find
Yeah.
myself organizing my thoughts around the solve for X variables, where at this early stage in May, I'm not taking positions as much as I'm saying, I know that my final position is going to be based on how I feel about this, right? So for instance, your final position on Marquise Brown for dynasty drafts in some ways is based on how you feel about Lamar Jackson as a passer. Something that has nothing to do with your evaluation of Marquise Brown.
Yeah, I mean, he was 3 going in, and now he's 5. So I definitely moved him down a little.
And you're gonna hear if he's 5th you're saying overall in your rookie.
Now on my rookie rankings for receivers, he's 5th. Yeah,
Right, and you have maybe like 3 running backs. Have you done overall rookie rankings for dynasty?
Yeah. I
So
have 3. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, I'm guessing you have Brown somewhere around like what 8th, 9th, 10th.
I have him 10th overall. Yeah.
Right, that's where we really boil these rankings down to where they're
And
actionable.
part of a big tier too. I mean, he could slide into the teens without much effort. That's the thing about this group.
That's the thing about this group is trade down. Basically, trade down as much as you can in your rookie drafts. So anyway, the question there with Brown, but you mentioned Hakeem Butler, and I want to step back and talk about not just Butler, but I think one of the biggest questions in these solve for X kind of questions, and it's a solve for X that extends across a lot of players, Pete. And it is the introduction of something like a pure air raid attack to the NFL with Kyler Murray, with Cliff Kingsbury. And the question is whether you are on the more optimistic side, which means take a chance on Kyler Murray and both dynasty and redraft, right? Be willing to buy into the positive end of David Johnson's range of outcomes. Spend picks on guys like Andy Isabella and Hakeem Butler and Larry Fitzgerald. Larry Fitzgerald's probably going to be disrespected. And if there's a player that doesn't fit in a classic air raid way, it might be Larry Fitzgerald because he's more of a timing-based route runner. And the air raid's a little looser than that. But Christian Kirk becomes interesting. Is Christian Kirk going to be the guy that fits so perfectly in this? Or does the whole thing across the board underperform because, well, we don't trust Cliff, or the NFL is going to solve it, or we're overrating Kyler, or the offensive line causes it to fall apart? You find yourself positive, negative, because this is a big part, Pete, of so many fantasy players' outlook, short and long term.
Yeah, I mean, could it be the kind of thing where it's like a Chip Kelly thing where maybe we sort of lose the excitement for him as a winning NFL coach, but we still want to tap into that offensive structure that produces results for us fantasy people? Kingsbury could be that kind of thing where the average football fan is seeing him fail while we're sort of going, well, I'm going to ride this this offensive thing as long as it's there. The clear issue for me with that team is too many receivers right now. And I mean, I like even some of their fringe guys, like a Chad Williams, I think is a guy, I'm not saying he's going to do something, but I wouldn't discount him, I guess is my point.
Sure.
He's talented. They've got a lot of that. So, I personally buy into the Kyler Murray thing with both feet. I believe in the player. I think the new NFL rules would seem to make him more viable relative to, say, a decade ago where, he might have gotten tossed around and beat up. Now they're going to flag a guy for landing on top of him. So, obviously like Breeze, Brady, and Rivers all sort of got like life extensions on some of these rules. For a young guy like Murray, that could keep him from getting banged around. And then we don't have that, Michael Vick scenario where we've got the mobile quarterback playing hurt all the time, So I'm excited about the paradigm out there. And I like Larry Fitzgerald with the running quarterback in that he's a savvy veteran, and once the play breaks down, he comes back to that quarterback and becomes a security blanket. So maybe he gets less schemed for him, but the fact that there's so many broken, open-ended plays and he's such an amazingly smart receiver, I think maybe he picks up some volume that way. Maybe I'm getting too narrative driven here, but it's something I see happening. But Butler's the guy I see this year where I don't see it happening for Hakeem this year, because I'm with you on Kirk, and I think some of the other guys they have are a little bit more ready to go out of the box in that type of scheme. And I love DJ in this versus last year.
Yeah, and I think so. I was going through my running back rankings, and I ended up with David Johnson 5, which I think is going to end up being optimistic. And
who's 1 through 4, just out of curiosity?
Here's my argument.
Saquon, Zeke.
The 4 are Saquon. This is not the order.
Right.
Okay. The 4 are Saquon, Zeke, McCaffrey, and Kamara. Okay.
Okay. Yep.
And in the task, and I'll run this past you. You can previews of articles, but also I'm trying to organize my thoughts of how I'm going to present this information, but I'm just trying to capture my thought process here. Right. So, those 4 are the top 4, mainly because of ceiling plus lack of large risk factors. Okay.
Right.
They're all on the upslope with their careers, stable offenses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, maybe this is where I'm going with this, right? Because I think that in sorting them out, Zeke might be like the least exciting, because even though they finally gave him 77 receptions last year, they were so reluctant to make him a cornerstone of the passing game. And, it's still, it's just not a dynamic offense, right? Or the way they use him is not dynamic.
I think you nailed it, man.
Yeah.
Right from the get-go. He's not exciting because exactly how he's going to do what he's going to do. And
it's the offense.
4 and 7 yard runs and touchdowns. And
right.
Accumulation of target turning into receptions, and the points are always going to be there. I have Elliott pretty much tied with Saquon at the top of my board, and I know that's I worry about Saquon this year in the way I should have worried about DJ last year.
Well, that's the thing, right? So I ended up with Barkley, and let me tell you, my knee-jerk first pass was Barkley number 1. Mm-hmm. But I ended up moving him down to number 4, and let me explain why. And look, I'm not going to really argue Kamara versus McCaffrey versus Elliott.
Sure.
I have it. I think Kamara, McCaffrey, Elliott, but really they're all ultra safe. Elliott might have a slightly higher floor week to week because he's so much more involved as a runner.
Right.
I think that with Kamara, maybe you have a little more exciting touchdown upside. With McCaffrey, he was just so red hot in the second half of the year. I understand why you take him number 1, but those are the top 3.
Right.
Here's why Barkley's number 4. And it's not a massive red flag. Not in the same way. I mean, this worries me less, Pete, than Le'Veon Bell. What happens when he's outside of Pittsburgh? How much of his value is Pittsburgh? Or it worries me less than Todd Gurley's knee. It worries me less than Melvin Gordon missing the fantasy playoffs the last 2 years. It worries me less than, say, Joe Mixon's lack of demonstrated ceiling. So if we're talking about all the other
Leonard Fournette's RB addiction.
Oh my, Leonard Fournette. I mean, that just makes me want to bring up Raquel Armstead.
Anyway, he's in the 3rd round now. It's crazy.
So here's the question, Pete. Here's the question. How concerned should we be when we're thinking about Saquon Barkley in the top 4 versus the other running backs, when we consider the possibility that come fantasy playoffs or maybe earlier, Daniel Jones is the starting quarterback for the Giants?
That's interesting. I'm going to say I'm not that worried about Daniel Jones, just in that I would
Because
imagine.
Gettleman's not going to do it, because Shermer's not going to do it, or because you actually think he might be able to sustain Barkley's value if he does start?
Well, first of all, I figure if they put him in there, Eli hasn't been playing very well anyway, so it's not like it's going to be a big downgrade. I mean, obviously the quarterback position there is a bit of a concern. What I'm worried about is, defenses didn't quite load up on Barkley last year the way they could have. They started to, and certainly once they decided to take Odell out, it started happening a little bit. I'm worried that teams are going to sort of start loading up from the very beginning, and it's going to be a tough sledding year for Saquon all year long. Not that he's not going to produce. I'm sure that he will, but I think the idea that he's going to expand on what he did, the idea that he's going to do, I understand.
Well, look,
I understand why you would put him at 4. I still have him at 1, but it's with less confidence than maybe some other people.
To back you up, I'm going to make you talk yourself into putting him at 4 by the end of this conversation. Well, no, because you bring up.
I'm worried. Odell Beckham allowed defense. Well, Odell Beckham forced.
Create breathing room and
to play vertically.
And you put Golden Tate in, and you're compressing everything closer to the line of scrimmage. And
right. That offense is incredibly static.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. This is an iteration of why you're not as excited about Elliott. There's just a lot of creativity, not a lot of innovation.
Right.
And you're right.
The difference is Dallas can force their will.
Yes.
Do it.
Yeah. And the
Giants, we have yet to see it.
We'll see. They did get Kevin Zeitler at least, but to reinforce your point, late in the season when Washington was, smoke was coming out of the hood, the Giants played Washington, won 40-16, and Barkley had a great game. He had 197 total yards and a touchdown and 4 receptions. The next week against Tennessee, the Giants did nothing, lost 17-0. Barkley had 56 total yards and 4 receptions. The next week against Indianapolis, they lost a nail biter, but he only had 77 total yards and a touchdown. And then he finished with a good game against Dallas, but week 17, Right. So in our small sample size there,
Dallas.
Right. So in our small sample size there of games without Beckham, these are the games without Beckham. Okay. He had one big game because they blew out a limping competition. Had one total bust of a game, really. I mean, 9 fantasy points in PPR league is fine, but not what you want from your number 1 or number 2, number 3 overall pick. And then an okay game in week 16 against Indianapolis. But you're right that is another volatility to Barkley. And when I look at Elliott and I look at McCaffrey and I look at Kamara, I don't see any volatility at all. If anything, there's a little bit of room for Kamara to grow because I believe Ingram to Murray is a downgrade, and I think the Saints.
I was going to say you're not worried about Lat Murray.
Well, not any more than I was worried. Right. With McCaffrey, the only thing you're a little bit worried about with McCaffrey is, look, he set the record for running back receptions last year. There's some regression coming in his involvement as a receiver. It's just, and he wasn't.
Well, yeah, because as that receiver group is growing around.
Right, but you could say the same thing about Kamara. To be fair, because the lawyer in me says to be fair, Traquan Smith could grow, and you added Jared Cook. And Cameron Meredith could be back. So, there's an argument.
Go ahead. Just, and this is just based on my impressions of watching these teams, but as much as I love McCaffrey, I have to say that I think New Orleans runs everything off of what they do with Kamara, whereas Carolina is more, they go to McCaffrey off of everything else.
Yeah.
McCaffrey's a counterpunch, whereas Kamara is the straight right. So, and that's a little touchy-feely, but so I do worry a little bit about Kamara just in terms of if he's getting a lot of ground volume.
Right.
What happens to him, say, week 12, 13, 14?
Yeah, that's fair. And even last year, they started out without Ingram really working him. But even last year, he had like less than 200 carries, I think.
Right. So, last year is a weird year because there's these bumps and turns with Ingram. And before Ingram was just crazy. They were giving him. I mean, he was a DFS machine. You were crazy if you didn't play Kamara.
Which plays those numbers a little bit, but I'm not necessarily worried about them overworking Kamara. And I think why in my first pass I ended up with Kamara number 1 is the Saints offense just feels so much like a shelter for fantasy. I mean, you're Pete Carmichael and Sean Payton in that offensive line and Drew Brees. This offense is going to preserve or maximize even the value of the players that are central to it. The Kamara's do it. But I mean, I'm not going to quibble about the order of those 3. I just think that, and you outlined a really good additional risk factor with Barkley when we're splitting the hairs that we split in the top 4 of fantasy drafts.
Yeah, I mean, the one guy I really can't find a negative on is Zeke. Will they throw to him a little less this year? Yeah, I think probably, because Witten might give them a little bit more of a viable guy, but the whole offense is going to be spread out more. My feeling on Zeke is that maybe he loses 10 receptions, maybe. Yeah. I think he gets that back in touchdowns, because touchdowns really weren't happening for him last year the way they could have. Right. And if this offense is now going to be more complete and they have Cooper all year, just the number of touchdowns that offense scores could go up significantly.
Yeah, and I definitely won't go to the mat against Zeke number one. I think Zeke, Kamara, and McCaffrey are that top three. And then the next question I find myself wrestling with, we're going into just short-term redraft mode now.
Yeah.
But the next question is, as I laid out, I do think that the running back one tier is 11, 12 deep.
Amazing how it's happened in a couple of years, right?
Well, and then there's this pretty severe drop-off, right?
And that's the key thing, Sig,
right?
In my opinion, is knowing when to stop taking the position.
You take
now
one,
all of a sudden where that tear drop is
right,
key.
and you let other people take running backs in the third, fourth, fifth round while you're getting much safer bets at running back and wide receiver, and I mean a wide receiver and tight end, and then you come back to running back later and take some guys that are undervalued bets on a piece of a backfield to see what happens. But anyway, in your overall rankings, Pete, because those four guys, even Barkley, even with the risk factors on Barkley of Beckham being gone and Daniel Jones could play, and it's not a forward-thinking organization, I still think he's clearly, like, you get a chance to take Barkley number 4, you take him. Then I'm debating, and I'm looking at these risk factors. So the risk factor with David Johnson is just the unknown of the offense, and we know it's not a good offensive line, and we're not sure about his usage.
A little better.
Yeah, I mean, Marcus Gilbert, if he can stay healthy.
10% better.
Yeah, well, and they had some health problems last year. I just think that their air raid, we could go off to a whole tangent here, Pete, on the air raid. And I just think it
has to help DJ. It has to.
Well, it makes the offensive line less important, honestly.
No, that's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, it's gonna pull defenders downfield. It should open up some screens and stuff for DJ. And
assuming rational usage, he'll be good.
Thank you. That you literally just said what I was about to say.
Which we didn't get rational usage. We got nothing resembling rational usage last year. So the question then becomes, you have the knee risk factor on Gurley, and feel free to expound on any of these that particularly interest you. You have the knee factor on Gurley. You have Bell changing teams. Let me just run down these guys real quick. Here, you have the knee with Gurley. You have Gordon's inability to stay healthy the last 2 years at the end of the season. You have Bell changing teams. You have David Johnson with the new offense and new surroundings. Mm-hmm. Is with all four of those having some significant risk factor, is that when you turn in a draft number 5 or number 6 to the shelter of a DeAndre Hopkins, a Julio Jones, a Michael Thomas, a Devontae Adams, who don't have similar risk factors? Or do you think I've got to get that running back in the mid-first because I'm really going to hate the running backs in the mid-second?
It's a good question. In best ball, I'll probably mix that up a little bit, do a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I am not – now, look, I root for the Jets. But at this point in my life, there's very little emotion involved in that. Okay, I'm not. I've learned to take my heart and protect it from the green people. Don't give them access to my heart because they trample on it. So, I'm pretty cold when it comes to Jet predictions. I've actually gotten better at it over the years because I've stopped caring about whether they win or lose. Because when you do, So Le'Veon Bell, I have to say, having watched the Jets last year, having watched Darnold, who is a little more savvy than I anticipated. I mean, I'm pro Darnold, but I felt his pocket presence and his feel for getting the ball to the running backs was pretty good for a rookie quarterback. I feel like he and Bell might do pretty well together. And the Jets actually do have ability in terms of stretching the field. They, Robbie Anderson's better, I think, than the average fan realizes.
Oh, he's so good.
He really is.
If you didn't know, and look, if you didn't know he was undrafted and you just watch football on a Sunday, you say, that guy is really good at that job, playing that position. And it's the fact that he went undrafted, and maybe people think about his off-field stuff, and the fact that he's been playing with the trash quarterbacks they've had, that is hiding how if Pete, if he was a first or second round pick, he'd be one of the most coveted guys to hold in dynasty leagues right now.
100%. I mean, and the thing about thing about Robbie Anderson is he can do a lot of different things. And one of the things he can do is run vertical routes outside the numbers. And, that's something that Darnold is really good at. So, for me, the fact that we've got guys now, and Enunwa as well is an underrated guy. Everyone thinks of him as a big slot, and certainly he's a good big slot, but he's a big, strong guy who runs 4-4 outside. The Jets do have some guys who can play vertical football now. Yeah. They've got Herndon is an underrated player at tight end, especially when it comes to making plays 20 yards, 30 yards downfield. And now you've got Crowder. So the defensive secondary is going to have their hands full. I think Le'Veon Bell, it's not good. I think everyone's going, Antonio Brown's not there to create all this space for Le'Veon Bell. I don't know. I think the Jet offense is a little bit better in that regard than folks think. And, Darnold's a guy who's mobile. I think they can do some things there. I think Le'Veon Bell, if he doesn't get hurt and if he isn't unmotivated, is going to do very well.
Right. So the volatility, so the volatility factors. So it's in conclusion, Le'Veon Bell, number 5 running back, number 5 overall. Is that what you're saying?
For me right now, yeah.
Well, and I get it.
I think he and DJ are right there together.
Yeah, and I get it. And look, these are both guys that have at different times ruled the fantasy world. So it makes sense. Hey, if you can get them at 5 or 6, you take them at 5 or 6. Risk factors be damned. The risk factors for Bell, other than the year off, which you don't want to yada the year off.
No, you don't.
There's Adam Gase. We didn't exactly love the way he used his running backs in Miami, although they didn't have anybody. True. They didn't have anybody that they gave a $50+ million contract to. So does that change things? Does that make Adam Gase be very straightforward in the way he uses them? Go ahead.
At some point, I like Kenyon Drake, but at some point when you've had the coaches at Alabama keeping him in a satellite role and then the coaches in Miami, at some point do we say there might be something that we're not seeing that's saying this guy is this? I don't know. I see him as being somebody who could do more, but coaches who know more than me keep saying the opposite. So
right. Well, I don't know if I'd say they know more than you, Pete, but they're privy to more than we are. No, but listen.
Well, they're definitely privy.
I really like what you did there. I want to put the spotlight on this. I really like what you did there because, again, when I think about this initial pass at rankings for upcoming leagues in 2019, not dynasty rookie drafts, going back and forth between these two topics, but upcoming 2019 fantasy drafts. I keep coming back, Pete, to the idea of the solve for X variables. And if you could map this out in a visual way to demonstrate it, the solve for X variable that affects Le'Veon Bell in his value and ranking also affects Kenyon Drake. And in the way that your brain did that lateral jump is perfect, because if you aren't worried about Adam Gase's usage of Le'Veon Bell, then you're saying he's a rational actor, and that should make you think, well, because the variable here for Drake is how's the new regime going to use him? How's Chad O'Shea going to deploy him? And if you think that Gase is a rational actor, and like you said, you're saying, hey, Alabama's coaches are rational actors, then you think Chad O'Shea, if he's a rational actor, is going to say, yeah, Kenyon Drake, you're not a true lead back, even though we saw a month 2 years ago when Drake marauded over the league as a lead back. And so if you like Bell, then you probably should not like Drake as much. And if you like Drake, then you should maybe have a little more worry about Bell, or you could just say Bell's so good it won't matter. I mean, Bell will win him over. But the point is, you evolve an internal consistency, hopefully, if you're thinking about how these questions that you come down on one side or the other on affect your rankings, that it has a ripple effect down your rankings.
Sure.
So I like that.
I mean, the thing with Bell, maybe the Jets will suddenly become this incredibly wise organization that really sees things with the proper perspective.
Right.
But my knowledge of the Jets says they paid a ton for this guy. He's going to get the ball a ton.
They'll call down to give Bell the ball more. Like this is the girl goes in the film. Give Bell the ball.
I'm not trying to be. I don't like to do fantasy football that way. But in New York, in most big cities, most major markets, you pay a guy like that, you're going to feature him. Right. So my concern with Le'Veon Bell is, like you said, the year layoff. Now, this is a guy who has skipped camp, has been away and come back and done well. I know he did get hurt early one year, right? He had a soft tissue injury when he came back. What was that, like the first time he did the holdout, if I'm not mistaken? So, some concern of soft tissue stuff. But apart from that, as long as he's in camp on time, that's actually sort of new for Le'Veon, right?
Right. Sure. Is we get a new
Yeah.
Le'Veon. Look, you can build in a positive side to this.
Right.
Say we
Right.
get a new Le'Veon. He feels appreciated.
Right.
Other concerns might be Jets offensive line, Doel of Gaines.
Yep.
But
Low gains. Now you're really with me.
sure, but Pete, we can do this glass
I'm
half
with you on
full. We
that.
can do this glass half full,
Yep.
glass half empty thing with every one of these guys. But Bell
Yep.
at number 5 is definitely defensible. We've talked about
Right.
David Johnson. What about Todd Gurley's knee? Because Pete, I'm running this through my head, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes I run this through my head and say, Todd Gurley was the number 1 fantasy running back on a week-to-week basis last year. If his knee doesn't feel right, you draft Darrell Henderson. I think is criminally undervalued in redraft and dynasty leagues. Unfortunately, you might need to include Malcolm Brown, or maybe I have this backwards and I'm putting the cart before the horse, or however that saying goes, and that actually Malcolm Brown is the CJ Anderson, because this is where it gets simple. We can be super simplistic and say Rams running back was a badass last year. It was CJ Anderson end of the year, whatever. Just get your foothold. If you can get it in the mid first, the best running back situation may be in the league. If you can get the lead mid first, and roster size is an important variable here. Your roster size allowing, take a Henderson wherever you need to, 9th, 10th or something, and maybe even reserve another spot for Malcolm Brown. And yes, there's an opportunity cost having 3 picks on the Rams running back. But if you were starting the Rams running back last year, you had running back 1. So why not, if you can get that without spending a top 5 pick? But here's where the negative comes in, Pete, is sometimes I just look at Todd Gurley and I run it through my mind. And of course, we're going to keep adding information. This is going to be fluid. All spring and summer, we're going to add information.
Right.
And we already had added information for Gurley because he said, yeah, I feel pretty good. I'm taking it day to day. I don't know how I'm going to feel in 6 months. What? I want you to know. I want you to know how you're going to feel in 6 months. I mean, even if you don't really know, I want you to say, I'm going to be great in 6 months. So that gave me pause. And then you think about the idea of, well, I'm going to spend a pick, whether it's the 5th pick, the 7th pick, the 8th pick on Gurley, knowing that we could see him week 1 and he just not look right again, because you almost want him to have a procedure. So there's a placebo effect on the mental side, because there's a physical side to these injuries and there's a mental side.
That's interesting.
And if your mind says something doesn't feel right, then you might have trouble opening it up, even if they do the MRIs and they show you everything and they say your knee is sound. If it doesn't feel sound to you, and this is where you worry a little bit about, you bring up Devontae Freeman, right? And we could pivot to talk about Freeman this year and the value he represents, or maybe the landmine he represents. Because Freeman didn't have anything done on his knee after it was a little bulky 2 years ago. He was never right last year. It was other injuries. Right. Who knows if those things are connected or not? So, in conclusion, or as I hand you the baton, Pete, what emotionally, psychologically, when it comes time to spend a pick or put him in your rankings, Gurley and that knee?
Well, it's interesting. In redraft leagues, if it's sort of like it is now, where they're telling us he's healthy, but we have doubts because they said he was healthy in the playoffs, or at least at some point. I mean, didn't McVay pretty much say, well, he's ready to go, or something like that? In redraft leagues, I'm very much of the mindset, take Gurley. Why not? Yeah. Because I think he gives me more ways to win a league than to lose a league. Mm-hmm. I go into a league with a 1 in 12 chance of winning. I mean, unless I have a big ego, maybe I'll say I have a little bit better than that. But your general odds are you're one of 12 teams vying for a 1 spot thing. So I'm more concerned with avenues to the peak than worrying about things that might go wrong along the way when I'm playing redraft. Now, if I'm in Dynasty, Gurley scares the crap out of me.
Yeah. I told someone, I had some remorse, Pete. I had some remorse in some ways, because someone asked me earlier in the offseason, before the draft, getting an offer of David Johnson for Todd Gurley straight up in Dynasty. And I said, take it because I want to divest from that, because you just have to be sober about it.
Right. And in Dynasty, you may have 5 Gurley shares and you want to differentiate a little bit or something like that.
That's true.
Yeah. And if you're like Brian Malone or somebody like that.
Yeah, if you're looking at it like stock portfolio and whatnot.
Right. That's not my personal style, but I know a lot of really successful players do it that way.
Sure. And there's that could easily branch off into, like, there's a whole thing of like playing fantasy football. I'm fine with playing fantasy football by the percentages. I'm fine with playing fantasy football to win, to keep growing your investment whatever it is, or have success. But I play fantasy football more as an outlet. I play fantasy football more as therapy. I could go on that whole tangent. And
Well,
I like
Brian,
to go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Well, Brian was telling me one time about like how he does things, and it was fascinating. And he said, like, I actually intentionally sold a player at a flat rate because I had just gotten that same player. He acquired a guy at an average rate because he had just sold him at a great price somewhere else.
Yeah.
So he knew that there's no way to lose that transaction overall in his general portfolio.
Across your portfolio.
Where I'm saying, right. And if you continually make moves like that, the water has to rise, right?
Sure.
So it's a very interesting way of doing it.
I talk myself into bad decisions when I do that. I actually traded shares of no, and this is me and my mistakes. I traded shares of Christian McCaffrey and James Conner in the offseason last year on that exact thought. Like, I was on the fence about both of them, and I thought, well, and Connor actually was a throw-in way before the Le'Veon Bell stuff was on the radar. Anyway, my
this
point
tangents into a question I want to ask you, but
go
please
ahead.
finish.
Go ahead, please. Yeah.
Okay. Well, no, please finish, man. I don't want to cut you off again.
No, because the idea, I'm just saying, like, that style of fantasy football doesn't work for me. I just want to be emotional. It's like playing with your little army guys or something. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a kid and I'm playing with my toys, and it just makes me feel better. And if good or bad, at the end of the day, that's the value that I get out of it. Go ahead.
Well, it's funny you say that, because like when I was talking to Brian, I was telling him, like, I can't do that to my teams. Like, I would feel like each one of my dynasty teams is like, in terms of fantasy football, one of my little children, you know?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't feel right selling low on one of my children just because I bought high on another. You know, it's like I have to treat them fairly. So
yeah.
I couldn't do it that way personally. But the question I wanted to ask you is, and this is about Benny Snell and the Pittsburgh backfield. Now,
right.
I'm in a league where I've got Connor and I've got Jalen Samuels, and I'm sitting there, and it's a super flex league, which isn't really here nor there, but I'm having a nice draft at this point. I traded back in the first round, and I still got Noah Fant. It's a premium league, and I was able to get Deebo Samuel, Drew Lock, and then I got Mecole Hardman in the second round with the pick I got on the trade back. Nice. I was feeling really good, right? Then I got Josh Oliver, who's a tight end that I'm personally very high on for value. And I was very happy at this point. 5 players I really liked, and now I'm up at the 29th overall pick, and I don't have a pick for a while. It's going to be like 30 picks before I go again. And I took Benny Snell, even though he was not the top-rated player on my board. And everyone's like, oh, gosh, reach, you know. And I'm like, sorry, man. I'm protecting my Pittsburgh running game. I've got 2, and now they're adding a third. Yeah. And I absolutely understand that it was a little bit of a, you know, I took the floor safe play, whatever you want to call it. I protected my roster versus going for the upside pick. What's your thought on that? I mean, I passed up on – I could have taken Deontay Johnson, for example.
Oh, well.
I know.
I mean
– my receivers are so loaded, Sid.
That's fine.
So loaded.
It's fine. Look, I would have probably said you got to take Deontay Johnson there just because of the history and the upside. But look, here's to riff on your subject. First of all,
you understand the question.
I totally understand the question. To first and foremost, number 29. So I have identified about 22 guys in this draft that I really want to get shares of if I can. And as we've hinted at, the value from, I think Josh Jacobs is far and away the most valuable guy in this class. And then the value from 2 to 22 is pretty fluid. Really and truly, there's less difference between my 5th ranked rookie and my 20th ranked rookie than has been in any other year I've been doing this since 2005, 2006.
I was saying that before the draft, same exact thing, and I'm saying it
Destination now. And Destination didn't change it. Destination scrambled the order.
Right, exactly.
I had Mecole Hardman, my number 19 rookie, before the draft, and that was with IDPs.
I had him at 23.
And that's with Devin Bush and Devin White and Nick Bosa ahead of him. So really, he was my 16th ranked offense rookie, and I think that he's not that much higher than that now, even though he got a choice draft spot and draft capital. So first of all, and you mentioned number 29, and 29 is obviously on the outside of that. Now I will see some of my 22 fall. Like Jay Sternberger. Jay Sternberger is one of my number 20. Is one of my 22. He sometimes
everybody's
falls.
Jumped on him so much now. Like I was high on him, but now you have to pay so much to get him.
Well, rightfully, because fantasy-wise, I think he has a ceiling equal to Fant and Henderson. I'm
Wow.
sorry,
Okay.
and Hawkinson. I think
Wow.
that I would argue that Sternberger, Fant, and Hawkinson have similar fantasy ceilings because actually, uh, situationally, Sternberger's far and away got the best situation, right? Aaron Rodgers,
Well, that's
and
true. That's
and
true.
only one established receiver in
And Jimmy
Devontae
Graham should
Adams.
be gone pretty soon.
Jimmy Graham's fine. He's back. He's practically gone. He's like
The
dead.
corpse of Jimmy
He was
Graham.
gone. He was gone. Exactly. Thank you. He was gone last year already, basically.
It's
So
true.
Sternberger is pretty. I mean, Sternberger had that nice combination of being somewhat refined, but showing you that he has room to grow too.
I definitely liked him. I liked him when I thought I was going to be able to steal him. Maybe it was
Right.
like that little emotional thing. I thought I had a guy that people weren't going to know about, and then all of a
Sure.
sudden, Sternberger, crud.
Well,
So I sort of moved
I
over to
hear you.
Oliver. He's my value guy.
Well, and Oliver's fine. Oliver's fine in so much as well. I mean, I don't know how much we trust David Caldwell and the offensive coaching staff of the Jags, but
Landing spot was sort of a mixed
well,
bag.
Nick Foles. Well, look, yeah, that's the negative. The positive, Nick
Right.
Foles. The positive is
Yes.
Nick Foles can foster his value. Now, how long will Nick Foles be the starter there? 2
Right.
years.
And I play
3 years?
Dynasty where, I don't like the coaching staff. Yeah, I don't like the quarterback, but that stuff changes. So
Well, and the quarterback is positive, honestly, for
Yeah, I
Oliver
agree.
to develop pretty quickly. And Oliver, like Sternberger, is pretty much a catch-only tight end. You like to invest in tight ends, and Fant is too. But Denver, I just kind of hold my nose. And
yeah, Fant's a little strange, but the upside, as you say, I mean, he may be like a pure receiver with a tight end distinction,
Yeah.
and in fantasy, hello.
And that was also Jared Cook, and you finally see Jared
Right.
Cook later in his career. And Fant, I think Cook is a good comparison for him because athletically, there's everything that you want. When it comes time to actually have
Well,
the
it's interesting.
skills, go ahead.
I think Cook's a pretty good comparison for Oliver.
Well, that's fine too.
Yeah. And did you know Oliver used to be a defensive end?
Right.
It's sort of interesting. You can see that defensive end athleticism in some of his game.
And there's that context again because it means he still has room to grow as a receiver. He's competitive, combative. Yep. Defensive players. It's one of the reasons I love Brandon Marshall back in his draft class because he actually went from he was a receiver and then he was a starting safety for Central Florida as a junior and a good one and a productive one. And then he went back to being a receiver and you could see how intense and aggressive he was as a receiver after playing defense. Defense gives players a my ball mentality. I swear, Pete, in football players play the ball in the air when it's an interception the way they should play it when they're a wide receiver. You see guys go through someone and et cetera to get an interception, but you don't always see that whenever they're an offensive player. Anyway,
it's definitely nice when you see those guys who really attack the ball, like Marvin Jones or
sure, and
Josh Doxson in college.
Yeah, no,
Josh Doxson, and
not
so far with the Redskins.
And because I hear this behind the scenes, and I think it matches what we're seeing on the field. It's just it's a commitment, dedication. They're not really sure how much he loves football, kind of thing with Doxson.
That's weird. I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, no, but you can't always say same thing happened to Aaron Curry. Aaron Curry was like the can't miss guy for Seattle. And look, no player can predict. This is where Matt Waldman's piece, The Great Emotional Divide, comes in. No player can predict how the intense grind going from college to football in terms of mind, body, and soul commitment is going to affect them. And this is why
absolutely true. Yeah.
This is why NFL bloodlines can be reassuring for teams. Because if a player has NFL bloodlines, that means they grew up around it. That means they have relatives, people that understand that. Go ahead.
I was just about to say some of it could be actual bloodlines, but some of it is just, like you say, having been around it, having a father figure who can say, just so you know, things are about to get real on you.
This is what it's going to take, and prepare you pretty much from the beginning for that. So this is more narrative based stuff, but I think it's important to understand the context of a player. Going back to how your review of Hardman changed once you understood, he's still new to the position. So I do think that we can understand these things. And just going back to Sternberger really quickly. So I think that if we're talking about fantasy range of outcomes for the next 3 or 4 years, say, I put Sternberger equal to Fant or Hawkinson. And then to go back to your original question about using roster construction to influence your dynasty picks, as opposed to the school of thought that is stick to your board, best player available, be blind or agnostic of your current needs, like as if it's a startup,
Do you ever find that your personal endorphins or adrenaline when you're actually on the clock sometimes crystallizes what you actually think.
Always. Well,
Because I'll override my own rankings sometimes, right at the point of making a pick.
That's how
It's
I
like,
know when to change them.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was about to say. Sometimes I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to take my 6. Now I want to take the guy at 7. Why did I put him at 7?
Exactly.
But it's this moment. It's this in the moment. I'm finding my truth. This is the guy I really want, and I do it sometimes. I override my own damn board.
You're not being you're not being honest if you do. I mean, you're not being honest if and this is why, like, I do my Bloom 100 and my first round of rookie rankings Monday after the draft, and then some of my rookie dynasty drafts actually start on Saturday when the draft ends.
I had one that started Saturday. It was absurd.
Yeah, well, it's okay.
It's okay. Madness.
It's madness, but at the same time, in some ways,
you're literally like stacking your board as the picks are going.
Yeah, which is it's a different skill, say, than a rookie draft 2 months after the draft. It
really is.
It's a different skill. But then the rookie drafts help me refine my rankings. And
what I love about it, though, is no ADP. Like, you are
right.
ADP.
Well, and this year, more than any of the year, that's how everyone wants to draft. Forget ADP, because you're going to have someone at 5 that someone else is going to have at 20, and vice versa. Trust your board.
ADP is
trade down. It's very wide ranging this year because of the wide range of opinions about these players, which really comes down to the wide range opinion about what matters: draft capital, the situation, our initial evaluation of the player, et cetera, et cetera. And the reality is, when we look back on all these guys, Pete, different things will have ended up being the most important thing for different guys. So there's not a one size fits all methodology that's going to crack the code for every single player. There's a different. Go ahead.
I had somebody asking me the other day, like, who are the players that are busts for you? Like, who have you really missed on? And and eventually he started sort of implying that I was giving a disingenuous answer, because I couldn't really just start listing players, because there's guys that I was right on that busted, even though I thought, because they busted for, maybe they got hurt, maybe they went to the wrong team, but I still feel like I was right on the player. There are other guys where they don't really look like they were a bust, but I thought they were going to be much better. Or, for me, sometimes the guys I feel like I really missed on, like, I feel like one of my worst evals was Nuke.
Yeah.
And I had Nuke as a fringe first, second round guy. I was high on him, but not nearly high enough. And I blew it because I didn't really end up with a lot of shares, because I was just a little too low in the guy. To me, like, that's a bust eval, right?
Yeah.
So, my definition of me busting on something is going to be different than the people who read me, because I know what my process was.
And look, what it comes back to, and I was going to say this about your ranking of, and my ranking of Hollywood Brown, is that rankings are one thing, but really you end up with actionable advice here. And if your rankings are higher than a consensus, you're giving a buy rating. If it's lower, you're saying stay away. Some rankings are so low that you're basically saying, like, for instance, I have Harry number 8, which is basically saying don't draft him, because you're never going to get him outside the top 3. And you're right to say, like, if Harry is everything that people think he's going to be when they're taking him in the top 3, then that's a bad call on my part when it comes to giving people advice. So what's
your, go ahead. Out of curiosity, why do you have Harry so low?
Because his skill set at this point is contested catches and run after catch, and that's just not a big element in NFL offenses.
And blocking.
That's just not a big element. I mean, you guys that get open in the route with route running is the biggest element of NFL offenses right now. And then there was even something.
I don't mind his route running. I've got a pretty legit issue with him at the release point.
Sure. Well, he doesn't create separation. We can chalk it up to this.
No, that's true. That's true.
The bottom line is he doesn't create separation. And creating separation, whether it's with route running or releases, creating separation is what harvests more target share than winning contested catches. Look,
okay. So let me see if I can sort of finish what you're going. So what I'm hearing from you is, Harry could help the Patriots. Yeah, he may play, but he's going to replace a component of Gronkowski.
Right.
He's not going to replace all of Gronkowski. You sort of see Austin Seferian-Jenkins and Harry dividing Gronkowski in a way, something like that.
Yeah, well, he just has a limited application in terms of the size of the offense, that contested catches by design, fades and things, back shoulder throws, and these manufactured touches to get the player the ball in space. That's an element in the Patriots offense, but it's not enough meat and potatoes to build a top 20 fantasy wide receiver, as dominant as Harry might be. But that's just
then you must be buying Edelman.
Well, for this year, sure, Edelman's
Yeah.
going to be another 100-catch guy, and
Yeah.
let's and Pete, I'm still willing to throw a 20th round pick at Josh Gordon. That's not, we haven't closed the door on Josh Gordon
Oh
yet
yeah.
either.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
that's another
in
reason.
redraft, I'll
Yeah,
be going earlier than the 20th.
sure. So that's another reason to tap the brakes on him. So
Yeah.
rankings turned into actionable advice when you compare them to the consensus.
You know who's a
And
decent
go
sleeper
ahead.
there? Dorsett.
Sure, because they brought him back
Yeah.
because the chemistry with Brady continues to grow.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And there's a little void for targets there.
There's absolutely a void for targets there. And Edelman's not been the most durable. It's going to be,
I was just about to say it.
yeah. So, there's all kinds of interesting permutations there. Maybe James White catches 100 balls or something.
I was just about to say maybe White's a sleeper. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe
somebody's putting up numbers there.
Maybe this is the year he becomes central in the offense and stays central the way he is in the playoffs.
Did you view the Damien Williams pick to be about Burkhead or to be about Sony Michel's?
All of the above. Look,
okay.
The Damien Williams, Damien Harris pick, and I
find
myself.
Yeah, I meant Harris. Sorry.
Every time I look at Damien Harris on my rookie rankings, Pete, here's what's interesting:
I'm a fan.
And I know that for redraft, I'm well ahead of my peers on where I put Damien Harris. But on Dynasty, I'm not, and I'm wondering if I should be, because of the nature of Dynasty as a 2 or 3 year window kind of thing is like the biggest part of the value. Because look, here's the thing. Here's how I see the Damien Harris pick. The Patriots are about one of the most balanced offenses in the league and will continue to be one of the most balanced offenses in the league. And they want to have somebody who preserves and maybe even adds value touching the ball when they have their copious number of touches they give to their running backs. Damien Harris is a good all-around running back. He's not the best running back. And he never fumbles, and he's not the best running back at anything in this class, but there's no holes in his game. There's no chinks in the armor where you say, well, this is a time you take him off the field. So he could really be, I think, even more so than Sony Michel and Rex Burkhead. And Burkhead has big durability issues. So you're almost looking at Burkhead as like, he will contribute, and that's a bonus. Sony Michel,
valuable specialist.
Right. Well, and they would like to have his additions to the backfield, but now after drafting Harris, he's not necessarily essential when Sony Michel has already missed time twice in 1 year in the NFL. So I think it has to do with that, but I just think it has to do with knowing that no matter what happens in terms of injuries in their backfield, they now have reinforced their depth chart so that their running game is going to continue to click, even if Michel and Burkhead go down.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm a big fan of Harris. I think he's underrated in terms of his pass blocking. I think he's a better receiver than some people give him credit for. I think his feet are really underrated. And I think the one thing people don't, and this happens, I think, to a lot of Alabama players, but Damien Harris can block. Sure. I mean, run block. I mean, you put that guy out in front, he can knock people over. So the Patriots love guys like that. They love guys without holes in their game. No, it's very typical Patriot pick.
I might be vastly underestimating him because the other part of the equation here, Pete, is it is along with the Rams, the Saints, like the best place for running backs to have fantasy value. I mean, New England Patriot running back that has opportunity creates fantasy value year in, year out. So to go circle back, because this is a really good illustration. Thank you, Pete, of tangents off of tangents off of tangents. Because you just asked me a question. You asked me a question about taking Benny Snell at number 29 because of your roster construction. And I want to go back and just put a postscript on the Sternberger versus Fant versus Hawkinson discussion and say, even though you're right, Sternberger, people woken up to the value. I still think based on ADP, you might go into your draft thinking, I need a tight end. I'm going tight end shopping. I have to get a tight end.
Right.
Which again goes back to your question about drafting, not just based on your big board, but based on your roster construction and your needs. I think you go into your draft with plan A being, I'd rather take Sternberger and say use a late second. I think a late second's going to get you Sternberger, than use a late first, early second on Fant or Hawkinson. And then as you bring up Oliver, and you can have.
I have unrational love for Hawkinson.
Well, I love Hawkinson, but man, Detroit's just going to have him block and block and block and block. Detroit's looking at him at the stick.
I don't know.
Well, you're Matt Patricia.
I'm not so sure.
Hey, do me a favor, Pete. Like, put on the wig, put on the belly, you put your hat backwards, put on the headset, pretend you're Matt Patricia for a second. Now look at TJ Hawkinson. What did you just draft?
Well, I'm gonna let me flip it. There's a couple things here. No matter what I think of Patricia, I have to say that he was there for almost the whole.
Okay, Darrell Bevel. Then what? Pretend you're Darrell Bevel.
Oh, now okay, now you're going after me. Look. If we want to go to Bevel is a problem, not because I'm worried about the pass volume, because I'm worried that no tight end ever really worked for that guy.
No.
That concerns me. He
was with the Seahawks when they took the value out of Jimmy Graham, and they traded for him. They traded for him, and they still barely used him as a receiver compared to what the Saints did.
And same thing happened with Hardman when he went up there. They're not. One thing Seattle's not real good at is featuring a player. They don't do it well.
Yeah. Even when they pay him or trade for him.
Yeah, they think about it's going to work.
A first round pick on him.
They don't like bending what they do. They just don't.
No,
right or wrong.
The rational things we project, like Rashad Penny's first round pick, he's going to start. But those things don't. Russell Wilson is a great quarterback, and they just paid him. He's going to throw the ball 500 times, 50 times. No. So you're right. So this is now you're getting the essence of my hesitation on Hawkinson.
See, I just think if you're taking a guy that high, it can't be to be a blocking tight end. It just rationally doesn't make any sense to me. Bevel is the biggest concern. You nailed it. Bevel's my biggest concern. When it comes to Patricia, I think he saw the value in having a guy like Gronkowski who can be a great blocker for you, can do a lot of things, but who can also be the difference maker in your offense. Hopefully he sees Hawkinson in that vein. What I like about the situation for Hawkinson is that you have two guys playing outside who can be dominant. I mean, I'm a huge Galladay fan, and I think Marvin Jones is universally underrated when he's healthy. To have those two guys outside and to have a running game, if they're smart enough to let Kerryon Johnson be a feature back, and I think it's going to happen personally, if Kerryon Johnson's pounding the ball, if those two receivers are healthy outside, to me, that says Hawkinson's got some real opportunity in the middle of the field, but we'll see. Yeah. And I think Stafford's a real positive. I really think he's a positive for the player.
We'll see. I mean, I'm talking to Jay Molnar in the chat room right now. He's saying Stafford's on the outs. They want that rookie pay scale soon. And I'm saying agree to the extent that I think we've seen the best of Stafford at this point. I mean, we've seen
that's possible, but he can throw the ball. That's all I'm saying.
Oh yeah, he can. I just think that the blueprint is there for what the Lions want to be. It may not be what you or I would build as a blueprint, but I think it's pretty clear what it is. So you take Benny Snell, 29, and assuming Sternberger wasn't on the board, it sounds like from your experience he wasn't.
No, he was there. Well, actually, no. He probably was.
So
either way.
So if there's not one of my 22 there,
yeah, he was there. I passed on Sternberger.
Well, tisk. But look,
in my defense, I've already got Hurts and Fant.
That's okay because
and Oliver.
Because that's true, Oliver, and that's a good point. I want to add on to the plan A. I need a tight end. Look, Oliver you get Oliver in the 4th round now, even though he was a 3rd round catch only tight end. So with a quarterback who will improve the passing game in Jacksonville, but I can't knock you for taking Benny Snell, even though you passed on Jason Sternberger. Shame on you. Because there's a point in your rookie draft after your essential guys are gone. My 22, your list might be different than my list. Maybe you'll have 24, maybe you'll have 20.
Yeah.
That you treat it like a redraft draft. And this is where I get back to the guys like an early reveal player, especially running backs. And there was a guy, Drug Runner. I've been second week in a row I mentioned him. I can't remember his name now. That was on Football Guy staff, and he did this excellent treatise basically on the idea that you always want to spend your rookie picks on running backs. And back then, Pete, you're old enough to remember this. They used to say you don't judge a wide receiver until year 3. Remember, it was like it's slow developing position. We don't judge a wide receiver whether they're a success or a failure until year 3.
I definitely don't give up on them until year 3.
So, but there was a time that we really didn't hold slow starts in rookie years and even second years against young receivers, even highly drafted young receivers, and we've gotten spoiled. But his argument was, and I'm sorry if you're out there, Drug Runner, that if I'm mischaracterizing it, it's basically that like part of it was, or how I'll spin it is, what you have in a running back much earlier than you do with a wide receiver. You have to hold wide receivers longer to see what you got, and
that's fair.
And after you're to that drop off in talent, then taking running backs, and also just looking at your roster construction just for this upcoming year, maybe even through like September, right? Because look, I'm not saying you're going to cut Benny Snell from your dynasty league team, but from a redraft perspective, Benny Snell is an interesting pick just because the Steelers love him. It's a backfield that whoever gets to touch the ball produces and produces and produces. James Conner,
that's the thing.
Right.
That's
So
the thing.
so you're just taking here's a like
And I don't want to like I don't even like saying this out loud. I really don't. But look, James Conner's a guy. He's been sick in the past. I mean, I don't want him to get sick again,
sure.
and I don't know if Jalen Samuels is a guy that they think of as a volume runner or not. So if there's any kind of injury, Snell, for all I know, could be a volume back. He could
Right.
pass the guy I already have. And here's the key thing. Just we're going to talk about this, so I'll explain the whole thing to you. My running game is basically the Steelers' backfield and Dalvin Cook.
Sure.
I also have Peyton Barber and Rojo. I've got some other stuff, but I need that twosome to really get it done for me. So I wanted to protect it. Meanwhile, at receiver, I've got Odell Beckham. I've got Michael Thomas. I've got Curtis Samuel, Deebo Samuel, Kenny Stills. I got Hardman in the draft, and I've got some other guys too, Anthony Miller, and this is just off the top of my head. So I just didn't feel the need to go after another upside receiver. I feel like I'm a win now team. It's a 2-quarterback league. I've got 2 good quarterbacks. I've got Ertz as my tight end. I'm in win now mode. So that was just a simple protection pick.
In protecting your investment and think of it in redraft terms, and knowing that in a dynasty league, the waiver wire might not be as fat as it is in a redraft league, to make sure you corner the market on Pittsburgh backs.
In this league, 40 players rostered on each team.
Right. So you know that every week you're much more. So that's also very fair
45.
too. That's also very, very fair though. And look, when it comes to these rookie draft rankings and rookie drafts, no, it's the same. Our first commandment always: know your scoring and lineups. The idea, and let's add roster size to that. Know your roster size, scoring, and lineups, because then that gives you an idea of whether. So, alternatively, Pete, like you said, Ronald Jones. So if you were relying,
I'm not giving up on, don't get me wrong.
Right, and if you were relying on, let's say, if your number 2 running back, shudder to think, was Ronald Jones and Peyton Barber, then maybe you might push Bruce Anderson, even though he's undrafted free agent, up a lot higher on your board, because that corner's Tampa Bay running back for you. Or maybe if you're relying on Lamar Miller, you might take a longer look at Cron Higdon or Demario Crockett. Or at the very least, when it comes time for you to claim players, if a roster spot opens up in June or July, you're going to be quicker on the trigger to try to get more pieces. Like it's like Monopoly, like you're trying to be able to build hotels,
I sort of like Higdon, by the way.
Sure. Well, Higdon's really competent.
I feel like he's a little underrated.
Well, he's probably the first one to take of the two, although Crockett is a more dynamic back. Higdon is a little more reliable, and Alfred Blue should show us that the Texans love reliable. They're not, they want reliable, then they'll give up athletic upside and ability to add value to carries. If you just
Crockett's
have that guy,
got the fantasy skill set.
Right, where Higdon's like give it to him 25 times like they did, and he'll keep grinding it out.
Right.
But these undrafted rookie running backs, and even some of the later picks at running back, even because what I like about this is okay, I don't even like Quadri Olson that much. He's a lot like Brian. He's a lot like Brian Hill. I think Brian Hill's better. Like
I took
Brian
him
Hill
yesterday.
Well, but look, Devontae Freeman is a question mark, and Atlanta has a good offense.
And Ito Smith, as much as we may like him, is teensy.
Yeah, I think Ito Smith had his chance last year to dazzle us, and he just didn't. I mean, it's okay. Right. He's still a useful NFL player, but Brian Hill interests me. Quadri Olson interests me with the idea in mind that Devontae Freeman might go out there this year and just show us like it was beautiful while it lasted, but his body is kind of used up even though he's young. Raquel Armstead talking about Leonard Fournette. Next, we could be opening up our newspapers. Well, kind of figuratively, Pete, newspaper. What's that?
I really fought my eval on him, on Armstead. Part of me loved him, and then part of me was like, he's so overactive. I wanted to calm down just a little bit, but boy, he does have a lot of juice.
Well,
there's no doubt about that.
And he's next after Leonard Fournette. He's better than Alfred Blue. Okay, right. He's next after Fournette. So if you have Fournette skepticism, so here's a go ahead,
Paul Hackett and those guys.
Well, yes.
Alfred Blue really fits their mold.
Oh my, I know.
I mean,
But look, here's another example of how your rankings of players should be interdependent. Okay, so if you do your initial passer rankings and Leonard Fournette's a 4th or 5th round pick, because you're saying like I just can't trust it, nah, then Raquel Armstead should be one of your favorite late round picks. Because
absolutely.
The more skeptical you are about Fournette, and the more, and alternatively, the more you think Fournette's going to be fine, then the less interested you are in Armstead. Go ahead.
You want to talk about a guy where, I mean, I was just looking at ADP and I honestly don't really get it. Why is Derrick Henry going in like the fourth round of drafts?
Well, I can
That's sort of
only
amazing to me.
I understand
And
what
I
you're
don't even
saying.
love the guy, but
Well, and I suppose part of it, and I'm just going to try to answer this, but other people can also add their takes to this. I think
yeah,
part of it is just the number of times in the past that folks have been burned by Henry, assuming this is going to be the year. DeMarcus
right.
Murray is washed up. Now this is going to be the year. And then last year, it's like, well, DeMarco Murray is out of the way. Did I say DeMarcus Murray? What am I even thinking about here?
We all know.
My brain is addled. My brain is Swiss cheese for many things.
It's amazing we've made it this far between the two of us.
It is. It is. We haven't sputtered off into like our favorite Ben and Jerry's flavors or something.
Hey.
Which is also a very, very
or the
valid
fact that I'm going to see the Meat Puppets tonight.
Yes, the brothers meet.
Dude, I'm so jacked for that. And I'm seeing them at this tiny little bar downtown off Houston Street too. So it's going to be like seeing the Meat Puppets with 100 other people. It's going to be great.
And so you're seeing them in the city?
Yeah, it's at this joint called the Mercury Lounge. It's
great.
It's great.
It's close to like
I saw Mike Watt there a couple of years ago. Yeah, it's right off of Houston.
Is it Bleecker Street? I think Elbow.
I think it's actually it's on Houston. I think.
Yeah, there's a place
right down there.
I used to go see shows like at the Elbow Room down on Bleecker Street.
Oh yeah,
I think place even open. Is that place even open anymore?
I don't think so, but I've definitely been there a couple times.
So
the Knitting Factory, all those old.
Well, the Knitting Factory is a fun experimental place. But I bring up the Brothers Meet because that's from the Nirvana Unplugged, which was also taped in New York City, and the Meat Puppets came out during that show, I believe, and that's how Kurt Cobain introduced them. Is the Brothers Meet. So, and I could go off, and this is the point for me to start talking about Jazz Fest, right? Jazz Fest is up here, and 1 year, Pete, you got to come down. It's incredible. It's a total orgy of music. It's like it's
can't wait. I'm thinking next year, so
it's ready. Incredible. It's really incredible. It's really incredible.
Mercury Lounge is on East Houston. Just
nice.
Just so you know.
The Houston and the Ho in Soho, right?
Yeah, I mean, I love that area. I used to go down to the wetlands down in that area.
Yeah, the Wetlands Preserve, hippie. That was all the.
I missed that joint. I really missed that joint. I was there actually, like the last concert they ever had. It was the Spin Doctors. They were reenacting their old show that they did on this old album called Up for Grabs that they recorded at the Wetlands back in like '91 or something. So they were doing this revival thing at the Wetlands, and 2 days later, 9/11.
Yeah. Wow.
So it was weird. I was just there. Like the Wetlands are like in the shadow of.
Since you went there, see what's so funny is that since you went there, I'll go there too. That one of my Wetlands Preserve stories is I was at the Wetlands Preserve at a show when I found out one of my good friends died.
Oh gosh,
you're right. So New York City.
That's weird. I was at the Wetlands and I met River Phoenix.
Oh, wow.
So just to go along with death stuff.
Tragedy. Well, it's funny because it all comes back to New Orleans.
And his band, by the way, was really good.
Oh yeah, what were they?
They were really good. I can't remember the name, but they played. Remember, they have bands playing upstairs and then also down. His band was playing downstairs, and I was like, wow. River Phoenix got some game.
Unbelievably talented and poised for his age. Kind of like Heath Ledger, who also met an early demise. And I love River Phoenix and the Mosquito Coast, by the way. The Mosquito Coast is one of the most
good movie.
It's a great, like under the radar, great Harrison Ford under the radar movie too. And it reminds me of being down here in New Orleans, Pete. Which I love. It fits me like a hand in a glove because the idea is life is always that like dumpling of tragedy and triumph and love.
Was it Ione Skye's character in Say Anything? She believes that good things always happen with bad things.
Well, that's how the universe
theory of
works.
Convergence.
Yeah. I mean, the unity of opposites, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can't have. I joke about like how New Orleans has a 24-hour bar, and then right down the street is a church. Makes sense. You got to keep these things balanced out. Like we try to keep it balanced here on the couch. So to swing ourselves back in, well, since I went off on that tangent, I'll just mention Jazz Fest again and say for music lovers, the after show scene. Now that I've come down here before to visit for Jazz Fest, but now that I live here and I can try to catch everything I possibly can, the after show scene. It's Pete, you and I have some overlap in like going to see jam bands, and in the jam band world, right? If you go see one of your favorite bands and somebody comes out and plays with them, like Warren Haynes or
I went to
Bruce
see Crowded
Hornsby.
House about 3 years ago, and at the end of the show, David Byrne walks out.
Sure, right.
And
And
they
you're
did
like, oh
Road to
my
Nowhere.
God.
Yeah,
Right.
no, yeah.
It
was
makes
amazing.
it memorable and special,
Yep.
right? Like you'll
Yep.
always remember that when these bands.
And it was at a little joint. It was at the Bowery Ballroom, so there's barely anybody
nice.
there.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I know that place too. And it's a
I'm
very
going to send you the video of that. You'll love it.
it's a very special thing whenever you get to see a band that you like with a special guest, and usually the song they pick is an interesting choice that reveals like a shared bond between the musicians.
You want to hear a weird one?
Go ahead.
I went to see Neil Young at Jones Beach. And right in the middle of the show, Bruce Springsteen comes out, and they did 3 acoustic songs together. I mean, not the guy I would have expected to come out of the Neil Young show. And it was great, by the way.
Yeah, Bruce Springsteen came out with a fish at Bonnaroo. And also the Bruce Springsteen.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and the Bruce Springsteen show at Jazz Fest here in 2006, the first Jazz Fest after Katrina, speaking of events that make you go dun dun dun.
That's heavy, yeah.
Is legendary. It's just legendary what he did down here. It's Bruce Springsteen, heart and soul. And by the way, you mentioned Jones Beach. There was a run where like everybody I knew got arrested at Jones Beach. Like, be careful, be careful out there at Jones Beach. I don't know if it's still like that.
It's funny. No, actually, it's an uptight venue. In fact, if you're doing Jones Beach, my recommendation is go party in Long Beach, and then just make that quarter-mile drive over to the venue.
Yeah. Okay. Mickey K is saying, or football, and look, it's on the couch, and I wait until we get like deep into the show before I go up on these tangents. But just folks, come down for Jazz Fest. You never know who you're going to see come out, and you're going to see somebody good, like Foundation of Funk, which is basically like getting to see the Meters, which is
that
right.
Would be amazing.
Phil Lesh came out with them.
Oh wow!
And they did Iko.
His bass with them would sound really interesting.
Oh yeah, Phil Lesh and George Porter. George Porter Jr. you can see any Monday night at the Maple Leaf. The man is a legend. There's a lot of cases like that down here in New Orleans.
I'm coming down. There's no doubt. And we need to get you up at some point, and it's going to be tough to do it.
Yeah.
But at some point, maybe 2021.
Right.
If you can make the Wilco Salad Sound Festival.
Oh yeah.
It is amazing.
Like Adams, Massachusetts, right?
North Adams. The venue itself is beautiful. Like you could go just to go to the venue, but I mean, they just do such a good job curating it every year. The bands fit.
Tweety.
They just do, they do a really, really good job, and they make you feel like your family. Yeah. They don't charge you for parking. The whole thing's cheap. Beers are $5. Water's $1. And if you don't want to pay the $1, they have a hose. It's great.
Yeah, it's all like in the spirit of Jeff Tweedy, that's fun. I was once I saw it when he did that.
I'm halfway through his book, actually. It's really good.
Yeah, well, he's been through a lot, and he's got stories to tell, and some of them through his songs. So
he tells them very truthfully.
Yeah,
the whole Tupelo thing.
Oh yeah, and a lot of that from it's almost like Two on the Nose, a music documentary where you watch the band like disintegrate. I'm trying to break your heart.
The Wilco, yeah.
So we love music. We love music as much as we love football. And for those of you that don't love music, you're probably not listening anymore. So for those of you that are still listening, thank you.
We can't just go back to football to get them back.
Indulgence. Yeah, too late. It's too late, Pete. We lost them. But let me ask you a quick question. Well, and by the way, if I haven't made it clear, I'm more uncouth in the off season about introductions, but I figure I think yours is third time on the couch. I'm not sure exactly.
I think it's my second.
But
you and I you've done my show a couple times too.
Pete and I will in the future. Pete Davidson at Rotobahn, ROTOBAHN, and also do fantasy work for WEEI. But I want to ask you, where did Rotobahn come from? Where did the name Rotobahn come from? Is it Speed Racer?
Here's it's funny. It's an outdated thing. The website no longer really embodies what the word was supposed to be. Mm-hmm. When we first opened up, we wanted to be the website because I was coming out of this thing where I was stay-at-home dad, and I had actually prepared for drafts using other people's websites because I, slept 1 hour a day and yada, yada, yada. And then when I finally got my mojo back, I was writing for a site called Fantasy Phenoms, and people were like, dude, why don't you just have your own site, So I'm like, yeah, maybe I will. So then I'm like, okay, I need a word with Roto in it. And we wanted something that was really fast. So we combined Rotobahn with Autobahn. So this was the fastest way to get ready for your draft. And we used to have, a cheat sheet and a one-page draft plan, and you could have literally not looked at anything football all year and just rip it and draft and win. So that was the idea.
Yeah, and
good football stuff.
Right. And the whole reason we even use Roto, right? Is
It goes
because
back
of
to baseball, exactly.
but
Rotisserie.
and La Rotisserie Française in New York City. The
Oh, is that
rotisserie,
right?
yeah,
I didn't even know that.
the rotisserie league baseball in 1980 had a scoring system, the rotisserie scoring system, and their founders met for lunch and first did their fantasy draft, I guess, at La Rotisserie Française. So it's funny how when you unravel language, you find how things. It's like the story, Pete, about the woman who cut off the ends of the ham when she would cook it, and someone asked, "Why do you do that?" I said, "My mom did it." And you went to mom and say, "Why did you cut off the ends of the ham, mom?" And mom said, "I don't know. Grandma did it. Ask grandma." You go to grandma and you say, "Why did you cut off the end of the ham, grandma?" "Oh, well, when we were a kid, we didn't have a big enough pan for a ham, so we had to cut off the ends to fit in the pan." You know.
Someday we'll have hamalytics and they'll stop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's so many bad like groan-worthy things I could say right now, Pete, for sure.
That was for Todd for Tampa. Todd from PA. Todd, if you're listening, that was
right.
for you.
Oh, yeah. Todd's great. So, and Brian Malone's great, by the way. Since we talk about Brian Malone at Brian Malone FF, Brian Malone is also great. It just
one of the best possible follows out there.
And I guess as we'll wind this up here, as now we're going off the rails, which is what we do. It's good. It's good. Look on this language front, and this Pete, this is like a reference to conversations we have that we won't necessarily get into, but it's kind of like a way to explain it. And I think I brought this up in a conversation that you were part of. I could be wrong, but it's usually if we're talking about topics that make people say stick to football, you're usually part of that conversation. And I brought this up, and I'll bring it up here again under the topic of how things persist in language or culture, and we don't know the origins. And I had learned that Matt, and I can never tell how many times I've told a story and who I've told it to, so I apologize to listeners if I've told the story already, but I don't think I have on the air. That everyone knows the song Yankee Doodle.
Yesterday. I remember.
Yeah. So, like, Pete, how old were you?
Good. Explain this, because I only got about 70% of that.
Okay, so like, how old were you the first time you sung Yankee Doodle? Like,
Me?
how many you first? Yeah, like roughly.
I was probably 4 or something like that.
It's like it's ubiquitous, right? Like 4th of July.
I'm old, so when I was a kid, that song was like
Yankee
around.
Doodle went but the song's been around since the 18th century.
I grew up during wartime and stuff,
right?
So.
But not the Revolutionary War. But the song's been around since the Revolutionary War, or around that time, right? And this is one of those things that's not confirmed. It's possible. It's a theory, but I like it. It seems poetic to me in a way, that the classic line, Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his hat and called it macaroni. Well, like, as a kid singing the song, I thought that was just some non sequitur, just kind of whimsical fun. Called it macaroni. And then I did a little digging on it a few months ago, and I come to find that the term macaroni actually was another term for a fop, and later on the term dandy, which actually at first was to be introduced as a more masculine counterpoint to fops. But as you know, the man about town, the bon vivant, and concerned with fashion and trends, etc. I don't want to mischaracterize the definition, but macaroni was another name for that sort of jet set, fashionable set at the time in the 18th century, late 18th century, and macaroni was a synonym or another name for that kind of person, because they would go to Italy and they'd be into all the latest things from Italy, and one of those things was eating macaroni. So
which is like all pasta.
Right. So look, the idea being that, like, the song is basically saying that American Yankee Doodle thinks when he puts a feather in his hat, he's high fashion. And the idea, the story. So
you're telling me Americans haven't changed very much,
right? The story goes that British soldiers, and this is a story, and it's not really verifiable, or someone can tell me if it is or isn't. Maybe it's already been debunked, because a lot of stuff I'm probably as bad as anybody about saying, "Did you know this?" and then come to find out like that was actually debunked. But it's possible. I'm not saying this is actually true, that British soldiers were marching and taunting kind of the Americans by chanting this, and then we of course take it and proudly adopt it as a song that we sing on national holidays, when it's really saying those yokels, those Americans, think a feather in their hat is high fashion.
I guess we're sort of going to, in some ways, we're going to be sort of the first generation without secrets. There's going to be Urban Dictionary for anything we may have thought or said. People like 500 years from now, like, that doesn't make sense. They can just Google it and figure it out in 2 seconds.
Yeah, but at some point we'll just speak in like pictures and emojis or something like that. Or
Idiocracy says it's going to be 1,000 years away, but I think it's more like 50.
It's getting closer. It's getting closer and closer, some elements of it. But we always try to keep it smart here, or thoughtful, or positive always, and
definitely don't veer into politics.
That's a tough topic to stay positive.
That's a hard stop.
It is a hard stop. And we're going to mercifully, for folks that have been on our little journey here, Pete Davidson, a wonderful person to have in our fantasy football world, definitely at Rotobahn. Check him out. And it's May. And again, this is why I'm talking about big questions, because we're more in the question part than the answer part. And that's when it comes to those rookie drafts. And I'm always available. Bloom 100 will be continually updated. Football guys, lots of new stuff every single day. Early bird pricing, I think maybe still in effect, but we want you on board for the year. And of course, you can be all on board all year with the Audible for free. So thank you, folks. You're our lifeblood. Thank you, everybody out there. And always, we want to bring you the best, most thoughtful, smartest, and not at all meandering, very directed, very, very focused conversations about football and music and everything else here, because you are so very classy.